And then with this trade-off also comes the question of governance and also the regulations around AI. Every
India is there or not. I mean, the way I see it is that with Gemini, ChatGPT being free for Indians, if you're with particular subscribers, with particular mobile operators, there is already market diffusion. Uh, so the one and these are very powerful global platforms with that can do vertical integration. One ray of hope in all of this seems to be open source AI. Uh, Great, thank you for joining us. One ray of hope is open source AI as a means of addressing competition in the space, and governments are also concerned about dominance in AI, as well as the control of the supply chain. Uh, uh, the sovereignty conversations that we were having about digital about 3 or 4 years ago have now expanded and become even more important in case of AI. We have a great panel over here. I'm not going to introduce the panel because you can see the names. And I'm going to start with you, Mark. Uh, I know you weren't expecting that, but I'm just curious about does open source AI solve a problem of competition? Does it address sovereign dependency? If it does, how does it do that? And I want this to be the baseline of the conversation because I think for many people they don't understand the importance of open source and the importance of the open web, and that's something that you're deeply involved in, deeply steeped in for decades now.
Uh-oh, I'm that old. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Nigel, for agreeing to host the panel. I guess I do start with that premise that if we care about sovereignty, and I do as an individual, as somebody who runs a tech company and organization, and also as a Canadian in my own country, I care about sovereignty and how technology relates to it. And one of the challenges, and I think opportunities, in the fact that sovereignty is such a big topic at this event, the challenge is, I think, you ask 10 people what sovereignty means, you're going to get 11 answers. And really, I think we're working through the question of what is it that we want. And I think at the heart of it, it really is control over our own destiny at that individual level, at that organizational level, at a national level. And being in a world where technology is really centralizing even more than it did in the previous era of the web, that makes it harder to imagine how we have control. Because it's centralizing in a few, not only countries, but even just regions of particular countries. And if we want to have sort of economic control over how our societies use technology, that centralization actually is really a barrier, a threat to sovereignty. And so that's where the open web and open source really are quite interesting, is at the heart of the open web, and Mozilla obviously has been a champion of the open web forever, and the idea of open source is that anybody anywhere can create anything on their own terms and keep it for themselves. And of course there's problems with that too, but at the heart of it, it is really designed, and almost the definition of creating technology in a way that allows you to have a better chance at sovereignty. And I say that phrasing quite specifically because it's not really the technology that matters in sovereignty, but the way that we make the technology does matter in terms of us being able to take control and have agency for ourselves. So maybe I'll just say a little bit in the context of AI and then pass it back to the other panelists. Why does sort of this value of openness, that I can take a piece of technology, use it on my own terms, own it for myself, even if somebody else created it, I can study it, I can transform it. Why does that matter and how does it matter in the context of AI? Pretty much the same way, but it is more complicated because we're not in software economics. We're not in a world where I can just download Linux and everything just works on a PC. We need much more powerful hardware. We need energy. We need stuff that takes a lot of money to train because of the hardware and the energy and the expertise. But what open source does, or what it can do in AI, and we're starting to see, is allow us to share in covering some of those costs, leverage what other people have built already and take it further. And so I would think as governments, as companies, as individuals, we want to, and we'll dig into this more in the panel, look at how to build this kind of commons in a way that helps our economies, helps our countries in the AI era, in a way that is similar to, but takes advantage or looks at the reality of how things work today moving forward. So I won't go further than that because I think we'll get into it more deeply. But I think we have an opportunity to build something really exciting for sovereignty with open source AI. And I think we have real risks with the level of centralization, both in terms of regions and companies that we face right now.
I'm going to move to Labu. I wanted to just get a sense. Yours is a government that's actually taken leadership in open source AI. You've got the Vishwam project, and in a sense, some of the work that's been done over there is path-breaking in the country. I'm just curious about whether you think, as India's a large market for AI, but does it actually have agenda-setting power? Can it shape sovereignty alignment? Is there room for deployment of sovereign AI in the country, or are we merely a market for large platforms?
Yeah, coming from Andhra Pradesh, our CM, he's very much a tech-savvy guy, Chandrababu Naidu garu. Even today, while I'm here in Andhra Pradesh, Bill Gates is visiting, and he's trying to, our CM is trying to talk with him on how we can actually leverage AI in sectors like agriculture, medicine, healthcare. These are the things that he's talking about. So he's at the forefront. And on the other side, he's already talking about quantum and everything. So we are South Indian states, primarily Andhra Pradesh, we are there, we understand what's happening, and we're trying to be the first mover. But at the same time, where are we as a country? There are two ways to go. One, what happened with the software industry. If you have seen from 80s to 2010, 2015, there are a lot of big companies that have come up in India, software as services, and like TCS, Wipro, and all these things. So there are huge valuations and everything. But if you have asked them, what are the products that you have developed? They haven't. It's more about servicing the other country products from the other countries. So that is one parallel I can say. And the other one is when we talk about the UPI. UPI was developed in India for the Indian market. These are the two things that I can.
But UPI is a regulated space.
Yes, that's what.
So there's a regulatory advantage over here.
Yeah,
how does this play out in AI?
That's exactly. If these are the two examples that I can quote here. One is the software where we are servicing. On the other side, you have EPI, which is very much regulated. I think we need to find good, play both of these things going forward, rather than just going on one thing and leaving the other way. So going forward, I think we need to have. If you're talking about AI sovereignty and everything, after what happened in the last 1 year, what we have seen with the trade wars, and how where we reached right now with various trade deals, I think India is producing enough data, enough tokens, people are producing enough tokens in India. I think we need to, going forward, we need to have our own LLMs. But at the same time, we should be very lightly regulated, don't say that I'm going to regulate everything like what China is doing. We have to be lightly regulated, maybe give few of the sectors to be regulated like healthcare, education, those things, but rest of it to be lightly regulated so that the foreign companies also can come and actually use this data, create the algorithms, LLMs and everything, but at the same time give that sort of a encouragement for the private players in India also to actually go and play around that. So I think we need to have both of these things going rather than have too much regulation, too much of open AI. We need to find a balance in these two things going forward.
Mark, wanted to get a sense from you about you've argued that open source can be a key avenue for sovereign AI, but it's not a guarantee. Uh, what are the minimum conditions that have to be true in terms of capability, governance, ecosystem maturity for openness to actually translate into autonomy rather than just a symbolic dependence, right? So, what does open look like to you?
Thanks for the question, and it's great to be here with this audience. I like how Mark Sermon framed the approach, which is open source gives a better chance at sovereignty and control. And I think the better chance is really what I'd like to focus on because.
Could you hold the mic up?
Sure, because a better chance of sovereignty, what does that mean? It kind of also means that open source, if you see open source through a socio-technical lens, where there's the technology and the social aspects working together in tandem to create the final technology itself, then it's clear that open source does mean more transparency, creates more optionality for developers and builders, but there is no guarantee. Open source by itself does not automatically lead to accountability, agency, or resilience. And for that to happen, there needs to be a concerted effort from the open source community and others to really galvanize around these tools to make them work as well, maybe better in certain circumstances, and sort of, maybe sort of, in low resource languages, et cetera, than the competition, which could work just as well or even better in certain circumstances as well. So the approach that we take at the Responsible AI Future Foundation, which is a new foundation, we really look to the countries themselves to ask them, what are your needs? What are your capabilities across the entire AI stack? Not just the models, but the compute infrastructure all the way up to the application level. And really do a deep dive and analysis to understand readiness, to understand the ability to adopt different technologies, again, along the stack, because it could be that a need might require open source. It could be that a need might require renting a proprietary model. And there's a sort of, spectrum between one and the other that I think really, if you really need to, understand the nuances and the very specific context-dependent aspects within each nation.
Joel, should countries choose sovereign AI or should they choose open source AI to deliver on sovereignty? Because we've seen over the last few days, and there's a big launch planned, I think, for later today. India is launching Sarvam AI, and they've been rolling out different products and services over the last week. I think today's day 10 or 14 days of rollouts for them. So they've timed it for this conference. I'm just curious about that choice between sovereign AI and sovereignty through open source AI. What should governments choose? When should they choose these? What should be the conditions in which one is better than the other?
Well, thank you. All right. Thank you. Pleasure to be here with you today. I think this is a great question. I think, Mark cornered the definition of sovereignty quite clearly. Sovereignty is about control, and it's about autonomy.
That's not how governments see it, right? That's how you and I see it.
I agree. Governments are coming along. The reason, to me, this is the right way to think about sovereignty is because it applies at the individual level, at the level of enterprise, and at the level of governments and nations. Now one thing I think we haven't perhaps put a finger on as clearly today in this panel is the fact that sovereignty actually applies across many different levels of the stack. We talk a lot about models. Models is the one part of the stack that's actually probably the easiest to share, but actually to have sovereignty, you need to be thoughtful about the compute infrastructure on which your models are running, and also the guardrails, and as well as the governance of those systems. And so I really think about the whole stack and the system as being part of a strategy for sovereignty. Some of these are easier to open source than others, And in some cases, when it comes, for example, to governance, it's no longer a question of open source or closed source. It's actually a question of, do we develop our own governance model or do we align to international standards? There are many reasons why international standards might be beneficial from an efficiency point of view. However, there are many reasons where some governments may want to have some slight differentiation in terms of that. I think the question of multilingual representation is one that's been alluded to, that is very relevant. The requirements in terms of language may change from one geography to another. And so I think it's useful to think about sovereignty amongst all of these axes. Specifically, to go back to your question on open source, and to take more narrowly the question of open weight models, I think the progress has been so phenomenal in terms of models that to start completely from scratch, to me, seems stepping back too far for most countries. I would certainly encourage many initiatives to start with what's available in terms of the open source today, and then build from there what they think is the solutions that is needed.
I'm Mark Sermon. I'm kind of wondering about the definition of open source over here, because we saw open source should be free, and free as in beer, kind of free, right? If you go back to the way we used to talk about open source earlier, but we've seen different definitions emerge of open source, number one. Secondly, the moment DeepSeek came out, you saw advisories going out against even using DeepSeek open source. What is open source today? And how would you
things, Nikhil.
how would you do? I think the mic's off. Yeah. How would you define it? How would you? What's if the waters for the definition of open source are muddied in this manner? How do people choose?
I mean, the answer is what is open source today in the context of AI is so many things. And it helps to get, I think, some definitions, but also it helps to not get too fixated on them, in really to be focused on what you want, and I think that is that control, that agency, and that sovereignty. But, at its heart, open source or free software have these characteristics, which are the ones I mentioned before, right? I can use it for free. I can study it, I can go inside, it's transparent, I can audit it, I can shape it, I can change it again in the future. Those are really the things those properties are the things that you want for that control, for that agency, right? So I can take it, I can change it, I can see if I trust it, I can see what went into it. And, the old thing that Nikhil was talking about from the free software world was a kind of joke from the free software people about stuff that was really kind of fake open source, and that was there's two kinds of freedom: free as in beer and free as in speech. And it matters because I think something that is just free beer is very attractive, but doesn't actually give you those qualities, especially the ability to to kind of look inside of it, to have transparency, to study, to change it. And that's a bit of the challenge with, and I think it's the challenge we have with the technology, but to get to this spot, but it's a challenge we have with things, whether it's, what OpenAI does with GPT-OSS, or what Alibaba does with Qwen, or any of these open weight models. They lean towards the free beer end of the spectrum, in that we don't know what went into the pre-training. There's still a big black box there. It doesn't mean we shouldn't use them, and we do, and I think starting from scratch on top of those things makes sense. But I think we do want to, in all parts of the stack, encourage ourselves and push ourselves to really have that full open source free speech version of it. If we can get to fully performant models where we can see what were the ingredients, what went into the pre-training, if there are ways we can see what some of the check points are so we can take it in different directions. And I think that will actually just happen naturally in the market. There's people like AI2 in Seattle that are kind of in that direction of more fully, truly open source models. They're not as performant yet, but I think that is just a matter of time. So to me, to go back, and then I think you need that same kind of open source across the stack in other technological components. That's different than the governance components. But whether that is looking at ways open source that we can use compute differently. It's probably not open source chips. We've never cracked that, but it may be open source techniques to use compute more efficiently, open source at the data layer and used in appropriate ways, open source at the developer layer. So to me, it's those core principles and then looking all across the stack, but also knowing we don't need to be pure about it. There is always going to be a mix. There always has been a mix of things that are along the spectrum from real openness to things that are closed and sometimes closed for good reason.
Can I then just drop a suggestion that Mozilla consider an open source index that ranges from free as in beer to free as in speech?
Well, there is, in fact, a publication, a paper coming out in the communications of the ACM on the spectrum of openness that we and others.
I think because for many of us in India, the free as in speech concern, especially when it comes to Chinese models, is there. Although we don't know how much we will have as free as in speech.
Well, and I think there is an investment question. I'd be interested to know in what others think on this. We do need to, and I think this is really achievable given how many billions of dollars or billions of whatever currency governments are throwing at compute, to back some of these projects that are doing the more truly open models just to get up to parity with some of the open weight models. That just seems like a solvable problem that needs some political will.
You wanted to think, Jen?
I was going to make a bit of a different analogy, which is, that there's the free beer and then there's the free beer recipe, right? And so free beer, you can give someone free beer, but once they consume it, that beer is gone. I can give someone the beer recipe, and then you have the ability to multiply that beer over time. And so to me, that's a distinction that actually matters, because once you open source something, you give the ability to have that multiplicative effect in terms of creativity, in terms of impact, in terms of building up prosperity.
Okay.
And actually, I think I like the recipe, and it's all the things you all said, and it gives you a head start. So if you're a government trying to build this, a company trying to build this, having the ingredients and having the recipe, you can get there faster and cheaper.
For the other Mark, I wanted to get a sense from you about risks, because we want to talk about ecosystem rollouts now. When governments adopt open weight models, what are some significant security and supply chain risks that you see in practice? What should they use to assess trustworthiness? And I guess free as in speech is one of them, but what else can they use?
I think the risks are very real. My previous role was at the White House a few years ago, and the question between, the value of open weight, open source models was very much an open question, and it was debated kind of vehemently within government and outside as well. And so, a report that came out from the Department of Commerce, the National Telecommunication and Information Administration, said that, in reviewing all the benefits of the release of open weight models on the most advanced models, they saw no reason to restrict the release of those models, but they also didn't say that there wouldn't be a reason in future, because the risks are real, in cybersecurity risks and other types of threats. I think in the agentic world that we're talking about, I'm sure is a topic of conversation here, I think a shift to agentic AI could also shift the security calculus when it comes.
You've seen with OpenClaw that there is barely any security, and people are struggling with that. There have been even just simple prompt engineering attacks, right? That's open source, but...
That's right. And, the prompt engineering attacks and sort of, what we call agent hijacking attacks, which is sort of to include different prompts in the model, such that the model does bad things like exfiltrate passwords and data and, run malware and those types of things. Again, at the Department of Commerce last September, they produced a snapshot of some leading open weight models versus US models, and DeepSeek in particular The model that was tested at the time, again, there's a snapshot. It was DeepSeek R1 0528, DeepSeek R1 new. On average, it was 12 times more likely than the evaluated US frontier models to follow malicious instructions designed to do those sort of bad things. Again, we need a concerted effort. Well, let me just say that report took hours and hours and weeks of sort of PhD and engineering time. And that is a capacity that not many countries really have. And so the cool thing about open source is that they have decades of experience sort of looking at cyber, particularly cyber risk vulnerabilities, and addressing those in a sort of open sort of way across international boundaries. I guess, and this may be already happening, I could be ignorant about it, but I think there needs to be a very concerted effort to look at those security risks when it comes to open weight models, not from just the government, but also the community itself.
Calista, thank you for joining us. And I know it was difficult to find the place. I'm just curious about, and go back to a question I'd asked earlier about choices between sovereign AI models and open source AI models. How do governments decide between the two, for one? And just to take off from what Mark just said, just curious about what kind of infrastructure decisions, cloud contract decisions, model dependencies, tooling decisions do governments need to take early in order to deploy AI?
Well, thank you first for your patience in still going until I got here. I did get to ride in a tuk-tuk on my way here after circling and finding a gate open. This is the price I pay for being on too many things back to back. So my apologies, but thank you. So I look after sovereign AI for nations globally and get to talk to a lot of countries about the decisions that they're making. And when they think about these decisions, they're looking at their overarching AI strategy, not just one component. And what brings me a lot of hope is they're looking at the long game. They're not looking at the first release or the first implementation, and they're not looking just at hardware or the applications. They're looking at the entire stack in between. So that's, the hardware, the foundational models, and all of the infrastructure that goes into building those great applications. And I think the great leveler that we've seen for decades has been open source, right? And for a century before that has been open standards, right? We've seen standards come about, at least for 100 years.
So
in
since
hardware.
you're talking to governments, what are they afraid of?
What are they afraid of? Well,
what are they
there's a lot of doom and gloom. Trust me, there's a lot of doom and gloom and misconceptions as well. And I think, when it comes to, proprietary or open or sovereign open, it isn't an either or debate. It is what can you build that is going to bring you the most capacity building internally to your country, where countries are looking to strengthen their intellectual as well as financial capacity for economic growth. That's why they're doing AI in the first place. No one is saying, hey, I want an AI strategy so I can go build a data center. That is never the goal.
So I'm saying that's on the positive side of things, right? They had this growth, there's some amount of intelligence that comes into the mix, optimization of tasks. What are they afraid of from a geopolitical perspective today? What's driving them towards sovereign AI? What's driving them towards open source AI? What's creating the demand? Because they can choose between proprietary models and open source models right now.
Yeah.
And that will solve the problem that you're talking about.
Right.
But what's the fear?
Right. So there are a few ways of first defining sovereign, right? So sovereignty could be in the hardware side where you're looking at supply lines, right? And if you're constraining your supply side on the hardware end, you're thinking about geopolitical concerns. If you're thinking about sovereignty with the software stack, you're thinking about nefarious, use or, influence, as you've been describing. And if you're thinking about sovereignty from the economic standpoint, you're thinking about your own workforce, your own citizens and companies' ability to continue to innovate as well as compete in a global market. So if you're looking at all these things at the same time, you're looking to invest as locally as possible for that economic argument. You're looking to engage as globally as possible, again, for the economic argument, but also for that collaboration point and those standards and open source that can bring you into that global developer community, as well as the confidence and trust and transparency that come with that. So those are actually very big paramount decisions that need to be made early. Now, on the sovereign, do I get to control my own destiny when it comes to models? You can build on top of and around or fine-tune existing open or proprietary models depending on the path that you take, or you can start from zero and build your own. We encourage folks to never start from zero. Someone has been down at least part of that road before. And so I think that as you grapple with all of the pros and cons of these, many countries are realizing that there's a benefit of both ends.
Lava, you represent a government, a state government. What are your existential challenges? What are you afraid of right now
Regarding?
regarding the deployment, like that push towards deploying AI, sovereign AI? So there's a positive side to it, but are there things that perhaps you're unsure of? Are there things that, in terms of what to deploy, how to deploy, what are the risks? What are some of the questions that you're considering inside the government before you take a decision?
As I mentioned earlier, at least in the last 1 year or so, what we realized sitting in not just at the state level, but at the as a member of parliament sitting in the Lok Sabha also, what we realized was not just in the AA level, but in every level, where are our choke points? So, in the trade deals, in everything, every decision we have to make, when we have to not just about the air, but even the sovereignty of the land, when we have to defend that, when we have to make a decision on that, we have to think where our oil is going to come from, where our semiconductor is going to come from, where are our choke points. When you have that at the back of your head, so going forward, as she said just now, there are different levels at which we need to maintain our sovereignty. That's what we think about it. Either at the hardware level, we need to have that. We have talking about chips, we're talking about GPUs. We need to have, we can't completely depend on some company outside of India and expect it to be like that. And you have seen what we have faced 6 months back or 8 months back when there was a restriction for a very brief moment of time.
Correct.
That semiconductors can't go into this country. The latest GPUs can't go into go into India. When you listen to those, obviously there will be red flags.
I'm going to move to Joel, because what should governments build for themselves? What should they enable? What should they avoid owning altogether? What are the decisions that they need to take, and why?
Yeah, I think right now, we've talked about the different layers of the stack. The place where I see a lot of governments wanting to have more ownership, but not just ownership, it's also about resiliency. I think someone mentioned the ability to not have the dependency on a single choke point in terms of your supply, in terms of your access to that layer. A lot of it is on the physical infrastructure, the ability to build data centers on their own land where they can have protection of the data locally. I would say that's probably number one. Number two is probably on the governance side. So the ability to decide in terms of security protocols, in terms of transparency, in terms of ability to audit the AI systems, that's the second place where I see governments having the most sovereignty. I would say the model layer is the one that is the easiest to circulate. And so at the model layer, rather than necessarily always build their own, what they're interested in is having optionality, not having dependency on just one model provider, because the changes are so fast. you have to be able to sort of flip on a dime which model you are using based on some of the latest advancements. You don't do that with a data center, and you certainly don't do that with regulation either. So the model layer is the one that is probably the one that has the most ability to change quickly in reaction to progress.
Where all in the stack do they need to preserve exit options?
I would say data and model is probably the biggest one. And exit option, comes in different flavors. But I would say certainly on the model, the tooling, I think there's a question of whether the agents are going to be captured within the same layer as the model. Right now, that is looking like a plausible scenario. And I would say so both of those.
So Mark Sermon, the beauty of open source is essentially about leverage, right? In the sense, leverage doesn't sit with a proprietary provider. I'm just curious that even when we're deploying open source AI, where is it that the deployer has low leverage? What do you think they need to strengthen for?
It's a good question.
Mic's off.
It's a good question. This is my thinking face.
Should I come back to you on this?
No, I mean, if somebody else has a good answer to that, but I think it's an interesting question of where they have low leverage. I guess maybe it'll get to a piece I wanted to build on top of Joelle's in terms of where government should be, focused. And I think, one of the places you have low leverage until you have it is talent and workforce. And so I think a key piece, and we tend to talk about these kind of almost physical or tangible digital parts of the stack. So I either do or don't have those chips and those data centers on my territory or the electricity for that. And I need to have those so that I have leverage, and I can or can't switch off the models, and you can. And I think building technologies at an orchestration or developer layer that let you switch and have hybridity and have the ability to change is really important to have optionality. You need people, though, to run this stuff. I mean, in some ways, in some areas, less and less, but I think we are always going to need talented people. And it's not surprising that you see, whether it is OpenAI or Microsoft or Cohere or any company in this space, building more and more forward deployed engineer programs or ways to embed technologists inside of companies, because you need people. And I would say, if you're relying on the talent from another country or outsourcing to talent from other companies to do everything you're doing, you're not building your own leverage and your own capacity. And I would say one of the things open source offers you is a way for companies in your country to be able to have a leapfrog, have something to offer into their own market without having to do all the R&D themselves. And one of the things I push governments on is look to your startups that could be the providers instead of you going to Microsoft, going to Palantir, going to OpenAI, and get them to come in and be forward deployed engineers in your government. Build up those startups that can be that capacity, because that's a way you can keep leverage. And if you just outsource it to other countries and never build that capacity internally, you really don't have any leverage.
Mark, if a country can't build their own, is deploying what realistic, where do they have leverage in terms of what can they do to still preserve sovereignty, whether it is in terms of resources? What do you think they should do, to preserve sovereignty?
Well, a really flip answer would be I would work with those countries to find out exactly what they would want to do rather than me telling them. But just to give an answer here to sort of give a framework, I think an honest answer is something like an acknowledgement that for many, maybe even most countries, the goal is not to eliminate all dependencies and be fully in control. For many countries, particularly in the Global South, which our foundation, the Responsible AI Future Foundation, works, almost exclusively, it's likely an impossibility. And so, the questions about how to manage both the risks and opportunities strategically, where to diversify where possible, where building a domestic capacity matters and matters most, and where to avoid single points of failure, those types of things. I think those are the questions to ask. And if I could just lay out a kind of a hypothesis, I think there's a certain paradox around sovereign AI approaches, which makes international partnerships even more important and strategic. By this I mean, if you take the sort of supposition that we can't eliminate all dependencies, and it's likely that each country is going to have to evaluate their dependencies across each layer of the AI stack. Approaching that systematically might mean that maybe using an open source model is the right approach, or maybe a proprietary model is right for this particular context or this particular industry or even the sector. Maybe that means choosing a regional data center rather than a transatlantic one. Maybe that's finding some type of leverage to make your existing contracts more equitable and those relationships. And so this paradox that this paradox means that there's a chance to be more mutually beneficial and interdependent through these partnerships rather than going it alone.
Callista, just wanted to get a sense about what is it that governments today could commit to over the next 12 to 24 months about doing with sovereign AI or open source AI for sovereignty. What do you think are the next steps to take?
I think the best.
Mike's off.
Sorry about that. I think for every one of us, it's been articulating the strength in growing your own intellectual capacity, your own technical capacity. Nothing is happening in our tech space without collaboration. That collaboration happens across every border.
Yeah,
and that collaboration is absolutely
India definitely
critical.
needs your chips. India definitely needs your chips. Those are the hardest to come by.
So I think that every country, priority number one is understand where your partnerships and synergies are going to come from. Attaching into global massive developer networks is paramount to accelerating your intellectual capacity. Attaching into existing models is accelerating your technical capacity. As much as you would love to develop all of that yourself, invest in your own engineers, your own developers, attaching onto your peers and front runners and leaders so that you can learn faster. Right? As I said earlier, there's no reason to start from zero. There are blueprints, libraries, things that exist to get going faster. That's how you start to, get that developer flywheel going. That's how you start to build that internal capacity. And I think that's exceptionally important. As a nation, don't start with like 50 things you're going to do in the next 3 months. Start with like a few, right? Like less than 5, maybe 2. And go from there, right? Get really good at those and then build from there. And you'll start to notice you're, creating and fostering innovation within your country that can start the cadre of startups that are going to continue to fuel that ecosystem. And it's not just the infusion of AI developers, but it's AI literacy. Ensuring that every industry within your country is embracing AI as part of their career, as part of their industry, as part of what's going to keep them competitive in their field. Whether that is, teachers or doctors or farmers bringing AI in a way that helps them be better at their craft, right? Every one of us, well, most of us, there are a lot of people way younger than me, everyone at some point in time had to bring cell phones into their life and embrace that. That was a step change. Embracing internet was a step change. There's a lot of step changes that had to happen. We're still seeing waves of folks that haven't embraced AI as part of every industry yet. And then, I'm not done yet. One more thing.
Yeah.
Every country needs to figure out what is it that's moving my GDP. What is it that is my economy mover, and double down on bringing AI to that. Right? It's not just I want to, double down on AI. No, it's what is my existing industry that I'm going to apply AI to.
This summit, there are about 250,000 people expected at the summit here in Delhi. And I feel that this is India's next evolution from the Digital India movement that we had about in 2016. This conference itself and the amount of attention it's got from both the central government, the state government, and the attention it's getting in the media from the startups here, this is going to lead to diffusion of AI across the country, where digital became a priority in this country about 10, 12 years ago. This conference alone is going to make AI a priority. Suddenly, every department will start thinking about how do I deploy AI. It creates a certain amount of pressure for adoption and deployment that served India when it came to digital. I think it will serve India in terms of AI as well. I'm going to open the room. I'm going to open this to questions in the room. Yes, sir. First here. Why don't you take this one?
I have a fundamental question, that I'm trying to address, because a lot of innovations that have happened in the history of mankind is led by the markets, right? And by the time society catches up and governments catch up, I think things are in a very advanced stage of development. This is happening with data. This has happened with natural resources. We may see it with water. We will see it soon in the space, right? So do you see at any point of time where possibly civil societies and governments and industries sitting together and devising this? Because that takes away a lot of this challenge around open source sovereignty.
Open question. Anyone you want?
You want the government go first?
This may be the first
I
example.
just coming out of a panel discussion. This is what I mentioned there also. I totally agree with you. There's one CEO of a software company in Bangalore. He was getting some NDTV or someone was interviewing him and asked him how come India has done incredibly well in software space. The answer he has given was in 2001 or 2002 was that the government didn't understand what we were doing. So they couldn't regulate. They couldn't, bureaucrats couldn't get into it. So by the time they could understand, government could understand, there's so much of it that has happened. So with this as well, it's the same, there'll be a lot of youngsters here. There are a lot of software engineers. I think we have the largest pool of it. What they need, instead of trying to do so much from the government side, trying to make everyone sit together, formulate something, I think we need to open up to them. As I mentioned earlier, maybe the hardware infrastructure, build it for them, give it to them, instead of them accessing those infrastructure from an outside company for a very high price. Why don't you subsidize it so that they can build on them? And at the same time, if you come to the data as well, again, government side, bureaucrats, all of us will sit together and say, oh, we can't do this. You can't, the amount of regulation that we can put. Instead of that, maybe 2 or 3 areas, yes, there'll be very sensitive areas like health or something. So those can be regulated, but rest of it, give it to them so that the youngsters can play with them, create the LLMs, not just for products for India, product for the world.
Okay, very quick questions, quick answers. The lady here with the mic. Is there anyone with a mic at the back?
What do you
Please go ahead.
think are the most common mistakes that government are making at this moment?
That's a fantastic question.
The governments are making?
Yeah. Common.
I mean, to me, it's the fragmentation of the regulation environment. Having regulation at the state level, whether it's in the US or whether it's within the EU, that fragmentation just adds so much friction, doesn't necessarily lead to better regulation, and is a major tax on innovation.
Yeah, but if it goes to the UN, then it just nothing comes out of it, right?
maybe standards bodies.
The UN is where regulations go to die.
Can I
Standards
just,
bodies, but let me, I'll give you my quick answer, which is I really think underinvesting in talent in their own countries and buying from talent in their own countries, the technology I think is going to take care of itself. They're investing in data centers and chips needed, but really invest in your own companies who are going to deliver things in your country.
Buying is a
I
great
just,
idea.
I want to like just kind of pile on with the regulation thing. It's the secondary effect of regulation that worries me. If you overregulate and stifle innovation, that talent leaves, right? That's called brain drain. You want your most talented startups leaving your country and going and starting their fabulous businesses somewhere else? Overregulate. That's a surefire way to push them out.
We have 8 minutes left. Somebody with a mic.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Next question is going to be at the back because a bunch of people there.
Okay.
I can't prioritize.
I want to ask the question about sovereignty of AI. There are two concerns about AI. That AI will take the jobs by AI.
That's
And
not a
that-
sovereignty question.
The second question is that AI is not that safe to use. We can use OpenClaw on our system, and using prompt injection, anybody can hack the OpenClaw. Like that, every single AI
Okay,
model
so
can be hacked.
I don't see a sovereignty question there. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to someone else. No safety questions. There are multiple
Later
panels
this
with some
week.
of these questions being answered.
Safety will come.
Safety will come.
As we are talking about the open source, I would like to discuss about the hardware open source. Like currently GPU market is quite regulated by the big companies like Nvidia and AMD. So we need some open source on the like designing of GPUs and their technologies. That I'm asking.
So go ahead.
I mean, one of the things that makes hardware easy to use, and kudos to NVIDIA for that, is it is actually like the software that makes the hardware go well, right? Like CUDA in this case and so on. And so having open standards of how to operate hardware can be a major accelerator.
We have 3 minutes left. A question at the back. At the back, somebody. Okay, that gentleman standing there, he's been raising his hand for a while. Short question, short
my
answers,
question is
please.
to Mr. Redmond. So I worked in the GenAI systems in the particularly heavy machinery industries. So my question is related to the edge AI, like in the heavy equipments like autonomous haul trucks. Real-time inference is very crucial. So my question is, like, NVIDIA working on the on-edge training, or is this like centralized retraining or adaptive training, kind of that?
So I'm going to allow that very quick answer because that's not a sovereignty question. But go ahead.
Yeah, my answer is I don't know.
She doesn't know. Okay.
Yeah,
Who
I
else?
don't work on
We want to get
hardware.
as many
Give you a
questions in.
very
There's a gentleman there. Just pass the mic to him. Right there. Yeah. Go.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. I have a simple question. I am from the health sector.
Mic up, please.
Yeah. I want to know about how do we conceptualize about sovereignty in health sector?
Sovereignty in health. I'm not going to talk about privacy here.
No, I mean, I think that, well, there is a privacy piece. I would use some of the same criteria as before, is that those people accountable and responsible for the health system have that control and agency over the technology, that whether that means I'm a hospital or a doctor or somebody in the government responsible for healthcare, I'm procuring, designing, managing technology, governing technology in a way that I control it, and it can't be just the rug pulled from somewhere else or the data be exploited from somewhere else. So I think those same ideas of control and agency matter. And for me as an individual patient, I would also want to apply those things.
Mark, can I also ask you to address the previous question on open source hardware?
It's tricky.
Okay. Who has the mic? Yeah, 1 minute left, right? Who has the mic? Mic, come on. Pass it on to someone, ask a question. I can't. One last question. I want to get as many people in this conversation. It's a Mozilla panel, so we need to bring, this is community here.
So I'm a software engineer. I use coding
Mic up.
models every day. So we can see the trend has been that the state-of-the-art coding models have always been the ones that are regulated by the companies, like that are privatized models. Always SOTA is much ahead of the open sourced, open-weighted models, not even the ones that we have the pre-training info about. So how do we tackle that? How do we make sure that AGI comes through open source, through like the open, through the beer recipe kind of way, instead of the beer kind
The
of.
scientist should answer.
We have AGI in the room now. Go ahead.
I mean, two quick comments. One, I think the gap between closed and open has been diminishing. There's a lot of analysis that shows that. Secondly, and having open sourced many models in the past or shared open weight models, in many cases, you share a model with hundreds of billions of parameter. That one gets a handful of downloads. You share a model that has like 1 billion parameter or less. That's the one that gets all the downloads. So the definition of frontier actually is something that is multidimensional, and a lot of the power sits in sharing openly much more efficient models.
Great. Thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to thank the Government of India for bringing the AI Summit to this country. It's great that we are having these conversations here.
Thank you, Nigel, for hosting.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you, fellow panelists. We always stand here for a group photograph. Oh, we need a group photograph? Yeah.
Do we need to squish in or we good?
Thank you, all of you. We'll hand over the photographs after 20 minutes.
That's 115 people in the room, no panelists, just me walking around with a mic and talking. I love that.
Thank you, sir. So we'll see you on Saturday. You did an amazing job. Thank you. Do that.
Thank you. That's okay. That's good.
Thank you so much. Take 5 minutes.
Well done, well done, well done.
This is a Potrella. Also all very
Oh, thank you very much.
I have done a lot of work for you.
I know. Oh, thank you for fixing this.
Next session is about to start. We are requesting to vacate the previous organizations.
I work at Crazy Horse Trapper, and of course, I taught everything.
Hi, Vivek. How are you? Yeah. Sorry? No, I was not on this panel. I think Kanishka was on this panel. But I am on the panel which is coming now. Yeah. Everybody, just like all the games and all crazy. And you are